Well, then let's call this meeting of the Parks and Public Works Committee to order. Um, uh, Deputy um, Clerk Garrett, would you note attendance? And let's start with agenda approval. Anything to say about the agenda?
We'd like to propose a change to agenda that, well, in essence, we're gonna have discussion in FNA and as well as council on the community center. That in light of the time commitment tonight, we take the community center discussion off of, public works. So make the motion to, strike the agenda item regarding the community center.
Agenda item number 3.
Agenda item number 3,
Okay,
non-utility capital improvement plan.
all right. It's so amended. Anything else? I'll entertain a motion to approve the new agenda then.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have an agenda. And I just lost it. Where'd it go? We had an agenda.
Again, back.
All right, I got it. Okay, next is public comments. Is there anybody here to make public comment or online? Now is the time to do it. We'll give you all the time you need as long as it's 2 or 3 minutes. Does not appear. Is there anybody online, Deputy Clerk?
Correct. We didn't have anything coming, but nothing online.
Okay. All right. Well, I can't believe they're missing this. Okay, we'll close the public comment period and move on to minutes. Approval of the minutes dated June 18th, 2024.
So move.
Second.
They're approved. Let's move on to agenda bills. Agenda Bill 24-078, State Route 202 Elkfield speed limit reduction. Who's going to speak to that? Mr. Fry. Good. I feel like I haven't seen you in weeks. Oh, that's too long. That's too long.
Good afternoon, committee. Just as the agenda bill states, this is for the lowering of the speed limit along SR 202 in quote unquote the elk fields. I'm going to just quickly share my screen. That I'll be on the same page. So I don't have a full presentation for you tonight. Instead, just this helpful map. But in essence, as you are all likely aware, SR 202 is a WashDOT owned road, not a city of Snoqualmie owned road. And you might remember that, at least for the council members that were here, about 2 years ago, I brought forward a similar agenda bill lowering the speed limit from the northerly city limits down to where just south of the middle school. That was a number of reductions in the speed based on the increase in traffic as well as just the change in the downtown landscape. This is similar, but it is from that southerly tip that we went to last time, which was at milepost 27.83, right next to the Snoqualmie Middle School. And this will lower the speed limit to milepost 27.95, or sorry, not 27.95, 28.28, which is the southerly city limits for the city of Snoqualmie. And so that would reduce it from 50 miles per hour to 40 miles per hour. This was a request that we did to WashDOT to perform this study. Meadowbrook Farm also has been urging WashDOT to take these measures for years. The tribe was also hopeful that this would occur, as well as the elk group.
The group of elk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it's mainly a safety precaution that WashDOT is proposing this due to the rising conflicts between the elk and vehicles colliding. And they have the study to back it up. They performed a study over this past winter to essentially giving them the research and backup to say we should lower it down to 40 miles per hour. I should also state that this same process is going forward in North Bend. Because as you are likely aware, North Bend city limits also start in Elk Fields. And so it's going to lower the speed limit down through 40, all through North Bend. I talked to Mark Rigos. He's the Public Works Director there, and he just pushed it through his committee. So assuming you guys approve this, they'll be in the same boat that we are right now. And then following our approval, if we approve it, WashDOT also, their state transportation engineer signs off on it, and then they install the new signs, not us.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, hitting elk bad.
By the way, a group of elk is called a herd, just so you know. Yeah, yeah. But that's fine. I understood what you were talking about. Okay, and when was the last time somebody hit an elk on that stretch?
I'm trying to remember there were a number of conflicts over the winter. It was like 4 or so just over the past winter. And apparently, we all met with, sorry, the elk group is like a group of people.
I know.
So, okay. And what I learned from them is that the highest risk of elk strikes happen when the calves are young and they don't really know cars are dangerous yet, which I guess happens in the early spring. But that was just anecdotal evidence that I heard through the elk group.
So with any luck, this will be taken care of before the next early spring.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Any other questions? I would imagine this is going to be an ordinance, right?
Yep, it'll take 2 readings.
Yeah, so we can't push this through on consent even if we wanted to, but I don't think we'd want to. Okay, you guys in favor of moving this forward?
Forward to non-consent.
I don't think we can do it non-consent, but I think we have to,
Ordinance has to be
it
read.
has to be non-consent. We can't do it consent. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, non-consent.
I do have a question for the state, though. I mean, it's their road.
Yes.
As long as we say yes, can't they just do it?
Well, so the study is performed by like a mid-level engineer through WashDOT, right? And then before they take it to their state engineer, they want to know that the city buys off on it because they want city concurrence with these speed limit changes.
Does it have to be an ordinance? Or can that just be an agenda bill in which we say yes?
So I ran that through, not that exact question, but when I chatted with David Linehan, it's an ordinance. I think it's because it's on our Snoqualmie Municipal Code. We do list out the speed limits of those streets being SR 202 and the mile
Okay.
plus.
I don't think there gonna be a whole lot of people arguing that we need to go faster
I'm
in
just
front of
trying
a
to
middle school
shorten the
either.
flow to
yeah.
get
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
good thing done faster.
Yeah,
but
no, I'm
whatever.
following David Linehan, and I suspect that we are not the bottleneck in this procedure. I suspect WashDOT will be the bottleneck. So by us doing.
I'm
2
not taking the
readings-
bet.
All right.
Great.
I think we're good on that one. Now we're going to move on. Thank you, Mr. Fry. We'll move on to item number 4. Introduction of the utility rate study 2025 to 2030 utilities capital improvement plan. And well, Mr. Gamble.
Yes, I'll give a quick introduction. Good evening, Public Works Committee. My name is Noah Gamble. We are going to jump right into the utility rate study, which includes the capital side as well. So in the agenda bills, you'll see it listed, or usually we'll include both details. But we're going to start, and I'm going to introduce Sergey here. You've already met him. He gave a presentation at the past council meeting to kind of go over what are utility rates, what are the impacts, what are we looking at, what's kind of the goal, the timeline, things of that nature. And this presentation and the following kind of feedback we're hoping to receive from you all is a discussion on revenues. And so I don't want to steal any more thunder from Sergey. I'll just let him jump back in and I'll take a seat and I'll come back in afterwards.
Thank you, Dylan, and good evening, council and committee members. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, I'm sharing my screen. You should be hopefully seeing a full screen of the presentation, but please do let me know if you're not. Well, again, thanks for joining me this evening to talk to you about some of the preliminary results that we're seeing in our rate study update. As Dylan mentioned, my name is Sergey Tarasov. As a quick discussion outline for our presentation today, we're going to do a really quick background review. Since we met already last week, this should be pretty fresh, and I'll be going pretty quickly through it. But if you have any questions about the past study, do let me know. Then we'll touch upon the overall rate study process again. It is a multi-step process that we have to go through, and we're going to be strictly focusing on that first step of the overall process, which we refer to as the revenue requirement. So we'll be getting into some of the details now today in terms of what went into the update this time around, some of the key assumptions that went into the analysis, and finally several options of the results. We've generated multiple scenarios for your consideration and discussion, at which point you'll be able to give us feedback and maybe talk about potentially any other alternatives that we may want to look at as well. Feel free to ask questions as usual as we go. So as a quick reminder, the last time a study like this one was performed for the all three utilities was in 2020. We did perform a comprehensive cost of service study, which looked at not just the overall needs, but interclass cost allocation, which looked at if there are differences to provide service to different customer classes. And based on that study, we did identify that we were deficient and we did need to adjust our rates. The council at that time wanted to provide some relief to their customers because of the pandemic that was ongoing in globally. So no rate action was proposed in 21. After that, we were anticipating approximately 3.1% average increase for a typical residential home in the range of $5 or so extra per month per year. At the same time, we also updated connection charges, which are assessed on new development, and we'll be doing the same, only the discussion for that piece will be during the further meetings. Now, there were significant changes since that 2020 study, specifically related to cost of inflation and growth for the city for all utilities. So we wanted to do a quick kind of a check-in, a fiscal health review before we started our major study in 2024. So around November of last year of 2023, we did our interim kind of high-level overview to see what sort of impacts we might be experiencing in 2024, just to give us a little bit of a heads-up boost, so to speak, ahead of the plan, because we did know so many things have changed, and we wanted to dampen the impacts ahead of time a little bit. So we did propose a modified plan slightly with a reduced rate strategy. Instead of the 3.07%, we looked at a 4.74% for 2024 only. And this study isn't really the intent is to recalibrate things with more information and look at the additional several years for discussion. Now, as we talked about last week, a typical comprehensive study such as this one consists of 3 steps. They usually have to be performed sequentially. So we have to start with step 1, which is referred to as a revenue requirement. This is where we basically identify the overall needs of each utility without diving in too deeply in terms of which class of service needs to generate how much revenue. That is done in step 2, which we refer to as cost of service. So again, the focus of step 1 is just identifying how big of cost of a pie do we need to collect without that.
Mr. Tarasov, can I ask you a question about step 1?
Yep.
The revenue requirement, I understand we are not going to be making money off of utilities, but there are defined levels of reserve funds, correct?
That's correct.
So we do have to raise more than we need to spend on improvements. But what is the where is there's got to be a point at which that becomes excessive. What is that defined?
And we'll be talking about the level of costs that are included in here in the next couple of slides, including reserve targets, what we're trying to achieve.
Hold on a second, Mr. Tarasov. What were you going to say?
Level of reserves is defined.
The level of reserves is decided. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll be coming up to that slide in a couple of minutes as well. And then the last step of the process overall is step 3. This is the definition of the actual rates. So once we know how much revenue we need to collect based on those defined targets and expense figures, we move forward to develop the actual fixed and variable charges that are necessary to collect those revenue targets. So again, our emphasis today is on that revenue requirement. At the very high level is just a comparison of your rates today to your ongoing obligations. The emphasis here that we always like to make is that each utility needs to be self-sufficient and be able to support itself on a standalone basis. Water is paying for water, sewer is paying for sewer, and so on. When developing a plan such as this one, we always need to look at our direct costs such as operating and maintenance expenses, debt service, capital, but also not forget about those financial parameters and metrics like reserve targets, like bond coverage targets, and so on, to make sure we're operating sustainable utilities, not just today, but also into the future. There are 5 elements that we like to kind of look at from a high level perspective when developing this analysis, starting with putting a monetary value to those financial policies. So exactly as you mentioned, what are those barometers and limits that we need to have on hand to help us weather the storm, so to speak. Next, we look at revenues. We always start at revenues at current levels. We never want to assume there's going to be a need for adjustments. And then move on to expenses, looking at costs such as operating maintenance expenses, capital, and associated debt service as well. All these elements have to come together to make up the revenue requirement. So on this slide, you'll find some of the key policies that we include in the study. And this is kind of the hopefully leads to that question that you're asking, the answers to the question that you're asking. There are 3 key policies that we brought back. The first one is associated with operating reserves. This is just meant to act as a liquidity cushion for revenues coming in at a different cyclical nature as expenses. For that volatility, we want to have approximately 90 days cash on hand available, which translates to about $1 million for the water utility on average in the next 5 to 6 years. For the sewer utility, it's about 1.1 to 1.4 million, and stormwater is 0.5 to 0.6 million. As you can see, these numbers are growing over time. That is because our expenses are forecasted to grow over time as well. So as our costs increase, we want to make sure our reserves are keeping up with those costs as well. The next policy is associated with capital contingency. This reserve is meant to act as a kind of a reserve for any cost overruns, minor emergencies, or unplanned projects, but it's not meant to act as a catastrophic type of event reserve. A good target that we use in the industry is a percentage of planned assets value. So it's about 1% that we have included in our study, which for the water utility is about $500,000 to $0.8 million. The sewer utility is 900 to 1.1 million, and stormwater is 300 to 500,000. Again, the reason why these are increasing over time is because our assets are estimated to increase with the capital improvement program. So the bigger the plant we have, the higher the reserve target that we're going to have as well. Finally, we have a debt.
Tarasov, can I ask you
Yeah.
a question on that?
Yep.
You mentioned that the funds are not fungible between different utilities. Are they between operating reserve and utility capital contingency? For example,
Go
if
ahead.
operating reserve gets too high and there's room in utility capital contingency, can we move those funds from one reserve to the other?
Typically, and it'll have to be based on I believe the city's policies. If they're not restricted reserves, and such reserves may include debt issuances. So if you borrow money, you definitely cannot use borrowed money to pay for operations. But if you've in the past transferred operating cash, unrestricted cash for capital purposes, I believe typically you would need a resolution if you do have a separate reserve tracking. But probably Drew will know the exact procedure that will be
Okay, so that's a
required to
Drew
do that.
question, not a you question.
He'll probably have the exact answer, more precise answer than me.
You want to answer that real quick?
I'll just, Sergey mentioned it, right? In essence, if there's any excess cash above and beyond what we need for operating funds overall, we usually transfer that into the capital fund to support our capital program. So ideally, what that's going to do over time.
Wait, say that again. Say that again. I'm sorry, you have to talk way slower.
Sorry, we would transfer any sort of excess cash above the 90-day reserve target that you see here into our utilities capital fund to fund capital projects. So that helps to reduce the debt service load over time because we're primarily going to be funding or have in certain instances in the past used that excess cash as purchasing those projects or paying for those projects. So
Is there ever a point where we say, oh, no, we took too much money from the consumers, we need to return it?
Well, there hasn't been a point yet where we've reached that, but there is a possibility.
That's
right?
good.
Right?
That's good.
Yes.
So when you transfer those funds into the into the utilities capital fund,
Correct.
it's fungible between the different utilities, or do they still stay sequestered from?
We would want them to remain sequestered within the
Okay.
utility.
Thank you.
But to your point, if at any time if the let's pray. If the inflation rate turns out to be less than what we planned, significantly less, we, the council, at any time can take action to modify the rate.
We don't have to wait for one of these
You don't have to wait for
plans.
one of these. It's best to do it on a basis of the data you have here.
Right.
But we, the council, can take action to reduce or raise the rates depending on what's going on. Matter of fact, we did,
In 2020.
in 2020 to get us, well, a little before that, to get us through the pandemic and also then to recover as part of that and that rate adjustment he was talking about prior. But
Okay.
that's a council action.
Just one caveat. So while we have sequestered the funds within the utilities capital fund for specific utility capital projects, it is a combined utility overall. And I think there's ordinances in the past, for example, and if we were to go look at the Snoqualmie Municipal Code, we would see both water, sewer, and stormwater combined as a combined utility, which means we could, as a city, legally use funds for, say, collecting water fees, for example, to support stormwater projects and vice versa. So we can legally do that. We haven't done that necessarily here at all within our utilities capital fund. We certainly have a fund balance currently that across all three utilities is above zero, which is a sound indication that we haven't had to draw upon, say, water fees to support stormwater projects and vice versa.
And that practice is not considered untoward.
It's not because it's one utility overall. It's the city of Snoqualmie's utility. It's
Right.
not, city of Snoqualmie doesn't have three separate utilities. It has one utility.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that pause, Mr. Tarassa.
Not a problem. Yeah, if you have any other questions, just let us know. And the last policy that we are including here is associated with debt service coverage. Coverage is a typical requirement for specific loan obligations. A good example would be revenue bond loans, and is basically assuring creditors that we can repay our obligations. What a coverage ratio means is that our revenues net of expenses need to generate not only enough cushion to pay the bond payment, but also an extra cushion to guarantee that we can make the payment. And a common requirement and legal requirement is about 1.25 for revenue bonds. Sometimes to make our ratio more solid and to signal to the rating agencies that we are a good investment, having an internal policy target of something higher, such as 1.5 or even higher, is a good indicator. It can help you save money over time if you are going to be going out back to the market. Currently, the city has an internal target of 1.50 for all debt, not only bond debt. So this helps achieve a strong ratio and signal that we are a strong investment that will be able to repay our obligations. So lastly, on the policy side, before we get into some assumptions, is the philosophy for funding capital. And this is where we structured our scenarios that we'll be talking about in the next couple of slides, is really how do we finance our capital program. One option is to look at cash financing, where we pay everything out of pocket, meaning that if we don't have enough reserves, if we can delay projects or raise rates if we can't delay projects. So some projects are critical and need to be done today. And if we don't have enough cash, we would have to have immediate rate action to raise the rates to that level. The next option would look at maximizing debt financing. So while the cash option would basically be the cheapest in the long term because we're not paying interest, the debt financing option will be cheaper in the front end, but in long term will be more expensive. Now there's pros and cons to both. Under one option, you're avoiding interest costs, and another option, you're allowing your customers to phase into rate action and mitigate and soften the blow, so to speak, in the front end. Another benefit of debt financing is that you're able to spread the cost of borrowing over the life of the asset, kind of look at that intergenerational equity by spreading the cost for additional customers as they join the system versus making current customers pay for everything up front. Some folks like to use a mix of both, where they look at not necessarily maximizing debt, but also kind of tying it to a specific planning target. As an example, renewal and replacement, like depreciation, could be the mark for annual cash funding, and then capacity enhancing projects could be associated with borrowing. So there's multiple approaches to handle it, and we've prepared several options once we get through the pieces in a couple of minutes. Now, in terms of specifics for this year's update, we are looking at a window of 2024 through 2030. For rate setting purposes, we'll be discussing and focusing on the 4-year horizon of 2025 to 28, but we do like to look beyond the immediate rate setting window to make sure we're not falling off a cliff. A lot of times when we have some additional capital needs that are in year 4, 5, 6, or even further out, we want to make sure that you're not going to be starting off in the hole, so to speak, if we don't just expand our forecast a couple more years and really make sure that you're that the strategy we develop can get you through today and tomorrow. For forecasting revenues, we are utilizing historical billing statistics for the utilities. We have looked at the last 3 years to avoid forecasting on any abnormalities in terms of weather. Water utilities, as you may be aware of, are significantly impacted by weather, especially summertime weather. And it did look like 2023 was a higher than the average year. So we're using a 3-year average to forecast water revenues. On the sewer and stormwater utility side, because majority of our revenues are fixed, we are using the latest statistical information from 2023. To forecast our revenues and customer growth into the future, we are assuming a growth rate of no growth for the next 2 years. So for 2024 and 25, we're estimating a flat line in terms of no additional units. After that, in 2026, we're assuming a gradual growth of about 0.5% for all 3 systems, and then going back to about 1% for the remainder of the forecast starting in 2027 and thereafter. That does impact our ongoing rate revenue as well as new GFC connection charges from growth. So because we're assuming no growth in 2024 and 2025, outside of the Snoqualmie casino payments that we have already received for the sewer utility, we're not anticipating any additional GFCs in 24 and 25, with new growth only starting in 26. That's when GFCs will start to appear as well. For forecasting expenses, we are utilizing a combination of 2024 budget documents as well as historical actuals to make sure we're developing a forecast that's as realistic as possible into the future. We are applying various escalation factors for labor, general cost inflation benefits ranging from 3 to 5%, with a weighted average somewhere in the middle to upper 3% for the 5 to 6 year forecast period in our rate setting window. Finally, in addition to the budget information, we are anticipating that we may need some additional staff to help us cover our capital improvement program, as well as keep the services that we have in place today. So in 2025, which is a year after our budget period, we're anticipating some additional FTEs, an administrative position, which is split between all 3 utilities, 2 sewer operators, a sewer lab analyst, and a water distribution technician. So again, because we are doing a multi-year horizon forecast, we want to be as realistic as possible in terms of how much labor needs and other costs we have. And based on our internal reviews and discussions, we anticipate that we'll need some additional O&M in our rate setting window. On the capital front, the entire capital program for the 3 utilities, or the 1 utilities fund, is $74.5 million escalated to the year of construction from 2025 through 2030. We do have several slides that follow this slide that will get into some of the specific projects if you're interested. But from a big picture, kind of 30,000 foot level, we have about $75 million, which include some of the bigger projects like wastewater treatment plant upgrades, reservoir additions for the water utility, and Sandy Cove restoration project for the stormwater utility. Now, the water utility does anticipate that a portion of the projects will be funded through capital contributions in aid of construction. That's what's the definition for the CIAC. That's kind of developer donations or external sources that the city is not responsible for. So the water utility is anticipating about $8 million towards the capital plan. Looking at the plan visually, sometimes it's nice to see graphical representation. You can see on the front end, the biggest portion of the bar is coming in from the sewer utility, which is represented in that yellow color. So the front end is associated with that treatment plant projects that we have underway. The water is fairly minimal, relatively speaking, compared to the entire capital program, while some of the bigger water projects will start out in the back of the forecast once we're through that bigger push for the sewer utility. We do have that bigger projects on the Sandy Cove project in the front end for the stormwater, represented in the green at the top of the bar, and then scaling back for a couple of years after that. So really, we do have a pretty high upfront need for capital on the sewer front, and then ramping down for sewer while ramping up for water, trying to keep it as level as possible. Now, getting into some specifics on the first slide here, following that summary slide, we have the water capital. I'll be moving pretty quickly, but do let me know if you want to focus in on anything specific. Here, we're showing that out of the $75 million, approximately 35 of that escalated to the year of construction is associated with water-specific projects. You can see that some of the heavier years are in 2028. Now, some of the projects are partially funded through developer contributions. I have tried to identify which projects on the right. You should see a note across from 4 projects, which are anticipated to be funded through some form of contributions. It's not going to be a full project funding, just a partial project funding in that case. And the level of funding is summarized in right below the total, just to show you that $8 million associated with the capital program for the water utility. Moving on to the sewer capital improvement program, the total project cost for the sewer utility is about $23 million. These projects do not include developer donations. There are other projects that may be only built if the full project is funded through contributions. So that's why we included the full list of projects on the water side, because there's partial funding. On the sewer side, we only wanted to show you the projects that the city will be responsible for, and we're not including any developer associated capital infrastructure. These are just the costs that the city would have to pay for through rates. Here you can see that there is a slightly higher front end because we are in the process of the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, and we have already started some projects there, so we need to finish that project up, and we have about $10 million in 2025 anticipated. Finally, we have the stormwater capital improvement program. The whole program is about $15 million. 3.5 of it are coming from that Sandy Cove project in 2025. So that's a heavier lift year of about $5 million. After that, it ramps down a bit with another slightly higher year in 2028. So with that, now that we have identified all our elements, now let's talk about how we can fund it. And going back to that funding philosophy, before we had a chance to talk to you, we wanted to present 3 separate scenarios for your consideration, primarily because the capital program is the major driver of our rate strategy that we have identified. So we're going to show you 3 options for consideration. Option 1 will focus on 100% cash financing. Option 2 will look at maximizing debt, trying to minimize the impacts as much as we can. And option 3 will look at hybrid approach, trying to reduce the debt from that maximum approach, but still utilize some form of debt to help us pay for the projects. So in order to communicate the scenarios, we're going to show you a graphic. Here, the bars represent expenses made up of the 3 separate utilities. The water is represented through the blue lines, the sewer is through the yellow portion of the bar, and the green associated with the stormwater utility. Here, we're showing what the total revenue requirements are for each utility in the next 6-year horizon. There is a box highlighting the first 4 years. Again, that's to focus our attention to that rate setting period of 2025 through 2028. Based on the first option of 100% cash financing the entire $75 million for the 3 utilities, we anticipate we would need a significant adjustment in year 1. If you're looking at dollars, a typical customer that uses 700 cubic feet or 7 CCF of water per month with a 3/4 inch meter would see a $144.50 increase in the monthly bill for all 3 utilities. That's an 81% rate adjustment overall. So if we're strictly tied to using cash and avoid debt, it would be a substantial increase in year 1. After that, we would follow that up with 4 to 5% rate adjustments per year thereafter for all 3 utilities combined, and 3% for the last 2 outside of that initial rate setting period. Again, the biggest driver behind these increases is associated with a sewer plan and having enough cash to pay for that capital improvement project out of pocket. The second option we're going to look at is maximizing debt. Here, we will be looking at 52% of our capital improvement program in the next 6 years to be funded through debt. So rounding it down, we're looking at half of the capital program to be funded through debt service. The new debt forecast is identified at the bottom of the table down below. You'll see that we're anticipating 3 separate issuances for debt service, ranging from $11 million in year 1 up to almost $15 million within the same issuance in year 2029. For a combined issue debt in the next 6-year window of approximately $38.5 million. Utilizing debt would allow us to bring down the rate adjustment in the first year from that 80+% down to about 10%. Again, significant component of that 10% is being driven by the sewer utility with those upfront capital needs that we have identified. After that, we'll be looking at close to 5% in 2026 and then around 3% thereafter. Now, the item that I do want you to note is that this is big picture system without getting into cost of service. There may be some adjustments that we may talk about the next time we present cost of service, which would change class specific adjustments. So this is strictly focusing on the entire utility need before kind of diving in and zooming in a little bit deeper. Finally, the last option that we wanted to present is kind of the trying to mixing a little bit more of the debt and cash financing. So an option somewhere in the middle that looks at financing about half of the debt that we assume, 28% of the total capital improvement program, rounding down, as you can say, 25%, a quarter of the capital plan being financed through debt. You can see the issuances are a little bit lighter, especially in the 2027 time period and in 2029. The combined issuances are around $21 million forecasted. Now, because of the reduced amount of debt that we have available, we still would rely a little bit more on cash. Instead of having that 80% upfront, we would need around 14 to 15% per year for 3 years. So these are annual adjustments, not cumulative, in the next 3 years before ramping down to closer to 3% thereafter.
Good Lord.
So really, that is these are the scenarios that we've come up. Again, there's a lot of room that we can try to wiggle in the middle, but the biggest driver right now that we're seeing is for that, even the cheapest option on option 2 is the capital plan and that wastewater treatment plan need that we have to construct in 2025. The water and stormwater utilities are fairly close to 3 to 5% on their own. It's just that the sewer utility is requiring a bigger increase that's weighing the entire bill higher up. Now, in terms of the comparison to our neighboring utilities, I always say these are a little bit of an apples and oranges comparisons because each utility has different requirements. Everybody operates the system differently. Some utilities don't even have sewer treatment plants. They procure treatment through King County system, but folks will compare. So we just want to make sure we're interpreting this information correctly. Now, while we are also undertaking this study, I know for a fact that a lot of these utilities are also looking at rate adjustments in their own studies as well. So towards the end of the year, they'll probably have similar discussions about their overall rates also. So that really concludes our first glance at that first step, the revenue requirement. Really, what we are looking for is a discussion and feedback from you regarding the 3 options that we brought to your attention. Do we have an inkling in terms of any of the options that we looked at today, or are there alternative options that you wanted to consider as well?
Questions?
Can we go back and look at,
Slide.
yeah, let's go back to S1. Scenario 1.
The 81% increase in our residential.
Yeah, that's a non-starter.
Okay.
Seems to me. That's just gonna crush people.
All right, let's go to scenario 2.
So maximizing the debt raises the rates the least, but I've got to assume that means we're gonna be paying,
You're paying it for 20 years.
you're paying, you're,
38 million.
That's correct. There's going to be new debt service, about 38 million over the next 6 years. And that will have to be, we're assuming a 20-year term. So the last issuance would be in 2029. So 20 years after that, you'll still be paying off the principal and interest.
while also doing all of the other improvements that we have along the way
That's
across.
correct. Yeah.
All right, and scenario three?
Hybrid.
We need, that's a kick in the teeth.
Yeah, 14% for the first 3 years.
Shorter period of time though.
Yeah. Right now, we're just paying off that last 2 million.
So we have to keep in mind, we're focusing on that green bucket, the enterprise utilities. So that related to general obligation debt. If we were to issue debt, it would be called a revenue bond. The last revenue bond that the city issued was back in 2018 for roughly $32.5 million. Don't quote me on that number necessarily, but it was in the 30 million mark, right, overall. So we've got multiple issuances, revenue bond issuances. I think there's probably 2, if I can recall correctly, out there, revenue bonds that we've had issued that we're paying back. In addition to that, there's a drinking water revolving fund from the state, a couple of public works trust funds. I think one just ended fairly recently as well. So there's kind of multiple debt issuances, if you want to say, kind of outstanding within the utilities. So that we're paying back over time.
Right.
Well, and underlying some of, there's also that philosophical discussion. 2 usually, we haven't got the second one. One is, as you bring new levels of service on, do you make those who used it pay for it, which is scenario 1? Charge them now. Or do you make those who will use it pay for it? That's kind of a mix somewhere in between scenario 2, scenario 3. They haven't done a Ford proposal which says just do it all debt, which I, at least philosophically, I've always come somewhere in the middle of, you should split the difference between those who use it and those who will use it as far as, but there's a cost. There's a time basis of cost of money to use those future funds. And there's no scientific answer here.
So, just your point. So we've mentioned a 20-year term. The last bond that we issued was a 30-year term for the most part, that paid for facilities that are likely going to last, in the case of our water mains and sewer mains with Greek streets down here, roughly 50 to 75 years, right, for the most part. So the goal, as we've talked about often with debt financing, is intergenerational equity. Those that move into the community, they're going to be enjoying those facilities in place, should potentially be paying for a portion of that project at that time. So in essence, that's often the strategy that other cities deploy, and one that we've certainly kind of deployed over time, different varying levels. So maybe it's not completely just full debt financing or at the percentage of what we've listed here at 52%. We can find some sort of middle ground or, settle at a number, then we can kind of work towards that. In addition, one of the things that you're not seeing here is we're presenting an average residential monthly bill. But as Sergey has alluded to, there are other customer classes. And we certainly know from our previous cost of service analysis, COSA as it's been termed, is that, say, the residents in this community have been paying more than their fair share of the utility rates over time. So in terms of the percentages that you see here, it may be less for residents and maybe slightly more for commercial, low and high commercial customers, especially when it comes to sewer and stuff like that. We'll be really kind of delving into the COSA portion of this, ideally within the next couple of presentations. So this is just kind of providing you with, it's not a complete picture. It's not a crystal clear picture. There's still some fog associated with this because we need to actually kind of reach that COSA kind of stage in order to give you some sort of clear indication of actually where are we thinking that the residential rates are actually going to be set at. So, but we kind of need to start this discussion so that we know exactly, we don't have 18 options necessarily. We come back to you with the COSA that we can kind of start down a pathway.
do we have in place for residential any kind of financial relief for people of lower income? Do we
There
or
are options.
that they
Yes,
can?
yeah, we absolutely do. And there's a form on the website for people to fill out. It's not just for seniors or the less able, low income people. It's for all low income earners within the city of Snoqualmie. And there's a range, it's a graduation. It's graduated basically in a scale, sorry. Right? I don't have that information off the top of my head, but definitely we do offer low income rates.
Okay, I just wanted, because I agree with Councilmember Vinson's comment that, I mean, that's where we're getting the pushback from, is the people that can't afford it, is, you know.
Right.
so-
Well, and people feel this everywhere.
Yeah.
I will say that the rates of increase a few years down line on this mix of rate and debt funding are much more palatable.
Mhm.
It's just these next 3 years would be just really tough, but
So if you want to smooth that out, though, you go to scenario 2.
And as Drew mentioned, depending on the appetite of the council, we could look at other mechanisms to try to dampen the front end, such as 30-year term instead of 20-year term. That's kind of where we wanted to get your feeling, you know, what your thoughts are. You will be paying more in interest for sure over a 30-year cycle, but again, it'll allow you to have a longer ramp up time, slightly longer, and maybe able to smooth it out a little bit more. You know, there's other mechanisms such as interest only, not necessarily recommended. This is just what others have looked at, trying to do interest only payments, which again would increase the burden of the cost, but it would allow for a bigger, smoother transition into rates.
I'm not sure that's, you know, to my way of thinking, the most responsible way to do it, but I do have well, I have a question, but you go ahead. You go.
I just, what assumption on GFCs have you
Yeah, there
made
you
in
go.
this?
That's
So it'll vary by utility. As I mentioned before, no growth in 24 and 25, so no GFC revenue. The stormwater utility, once we start at about 0.5% in 26, is about 150,000, going to 1%, which is 300,000 per year. So the stormwater utility is the smallest of the three. Under current rates, we're anticipating 150 to 300,000. For the water utility, again, nothing in the next 2 years, then about 400,000 in 26 estimated, and then going down to or up to about 850,000 or so per year, so close to $1 million for the water utility. And then the sewer utility, we're anticipating again about 300,000 in 26, getting to 600,000 per year in 27 thereafter. So in the longer term, we're now projecting in 26 and thereafter the additional revenue somewhere in the $1.5 million between all three utilities per year. But in the short term, especially for the sewer utility where we needed the most, we don't quite have any growth anticipated.
And the question I was going to ask on GFCs is what kind of leeway we have in what we charge for GFCs. Is that something that's prescribed by the state, or do we have any kind of wiggle room on how much we can charge for GFCs? For example, if you were to come in and build in 2028, if we went with the mixed version and folks in town are paying those higher rates for 3 years, and then somebody comes in and is developing in that fourth year, would there be some mechanism by which we could recoup some of those costs through GFC rates?
Yeah, so go ahead.
And what are the concerns that we have to consider so that we're not doing that irresponsibly either?
Right.
You know, we don't want to discourage people from developing either.
Right. So from a GFC perspective, these are cost-based fees, so they have to be tied to the cost of the system, the existing system in the ground, as well as the capacity enhancing system that's necessary to allow growth to occur. What we usually say is that we need to calculate a maximum allowable charge that's supportable by methodology that's acceptable in the state of Washington. And then we can set the charges up to the maximum level, but not above it. Then if you set it above the justifiable level, you open yourself up for challenge from developing community or other folks. So we do need to have a cost basis, and we can charge up to it or below the maximum level, but not above the maximum level.
And how close to that maximum level are we currently charging for GFCs?
I believe the current rates are set based on the previous calculated maximum allowable level. As part of the study, we will be updating those fees and taking a look at what the new fees need, what the new level is, but we're just not at that point of the analysis.
And by saying based on, are you saying they are at that level? Or we have a number that we go for that's, say, 60% of that level, that's a general go-to? What
They were pegged at that level at the time of the rate study last time, and then they've gone up by the EN and EER, the engineers review. It's a index for cost of constructing utility projects.
So currently our GFCs are at that maximum level.
But it might need to be corrected because the index might not be tracking with what is actually the maximum level.
Okay.
It's just a way of moving it over time without doing a full review to make sure that we're at that maximum level every time.
Right. Charges are usually set in today's dollars and to account for inflation between larger updates like we're doing right now. You're allowed to adjust it within the credited construction cost inflation index, such as the one that Dylan referenced.
Any other questions on that? I had one other question. I had one other question. I forget which slide it was, but it was about picking up some more full-time employees.
Yes.
And
Five.
there we go. There we go. When did we determine that we needed these other employees, and what was the reason for that determination?
Okay. There's a lot to be said about that. So first, we have our system plans that give us a range of employees needed to achieve the system plan as we've, basically designed for ourselves. And so we have growth targets and some other things that are all included in that, and all these capital projects that get built that then need to be manned or serviced. And the FTEs are kind of based on that in part. The other part is based on feedback from the supervisors who manage these FTEs in themselves for each of the utilities. And so these positions were called out by them, and it is also reflected in administration. Jeff can come up here and bounce that around if you'd like, but the short of it is that these positions were selected by the divisions themselves as what would be preferred, needed to move forward with the CIP and the levels of service called out in the system plans. But they are an assumption here, and there's a lot of assumptions in here, in fact. So that is one of them. I'm glad you called it out.
Do you want to speak, Mr. Tarasov, how much more of your presentation do we have?
We're pretty much done.
Okay, all right. Do you want to speak to that, Mr. Hamlin?
Sure. So staffing levels, as Dylan mentioned, we have the utility system plans. And in doing the utility system plans, one of the things that they provide for us are recommended staffing levels. Recommended staffing levels are based off of several things, but the size of the plant, the size of the community, the size of, or the type of operation and the complexity of the operation. So what he said was correct, is that it's based on some general metrics that are used for creating staffing plans, plus input from our own staff, who have to actually maintain the facility, who have the intimate knowledge of the facility itself. So the staffing numbers that we have had recommended were generated primarily by our consultant who created the plans for us in tandem with coordination with our staff.
So when we expand the water reclamation plant by another tank or something like that, is that something where we need more employees, or is that a kind of expansion that doesn't actually require more?
It could be if that one new feature that we added required a lot of additional maintenance. For instance, the solids handling building that we built during phase two, that is a labor intensive facility. It saves us money in that it reduces the sludge waste that we generate to a very dry product, which is less expensive to get rid of, safe dry product that's less expensive to get rid of. So that alone was saving us, you know, I think $250,000 a year, in the amount of money we were spending to dispose of those solids, right? So, but it also requires us an additional employee to operate it. So it depends. A new tank, maybe not so much. A new operating facility could be more impactful as far as labor impacts.
Okay, but a lot of people have put in their input on needing
Yes,
these positions.
yes, and we're gonna ramp up to it slowly. So rather than just go based strictly off that recommendation, we have added staff this year, and they're young staff. So they're not fully trained yet. So as we progress and they become trained, presumably they'll become more efficient at what they do. And so we may not have to fully staff in order to, well, at least meet all of the staffing recommendations. If we feel that the staff that we have is sufficient to complete the work in a timely, safe, efficient manner.
So what's the delta between the operating plan, staffing recommendations, and the recommendations that are put here?
That's it right there. The 2 additional sewer operators, 1 additional lab, 1 additional water distribution, and we need an admin. The admin was not based on the
So that was my specific question.
Yeah.
What was the difference between what the operating manual said you needed and what staff is recommending?
I don't think there was a difference between what the consultant recommended and what our staff recommended. That was a coordinated effort, but it was primarily provided by the consultant after communicating with staff and looking at the metrics. But I don't really know how much, I couldn't tell you which proportion of it was based on our recommendation, which portion of it was based off of the metrics that they use for staffing plans.
Okay.
And you said that we have the solid waste,
Wastewater.
what was the area we're saving 250,000?
Yeah, that's in the wastewater treatment plant.
Wastewater.
The sludge.
Are there more things that we can build so that this is just free?
No. Just say no. It takes.
Not yet, not yet. You're working on it though, I assume.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
That'll
Someday
take-
there'll be black hole
take
technology
5
that just
more
goes to the
FTEs.
sun, but that's not happening today.
We need more FTEs for that.
FTEs.
Okay.
Before the clock strikes there, I just wanted to ask real fast if there is some direction you'd like me to go in, given this is a lot of information. So some of the unpacking that I feel like you may still want to do is the assumptions. There's also the scenarios. Is there direction you'd like us to go? Would you like us to go to council next meeting, or would you like us to come back directly to our public works?
What do
There's a
you
lot of
guys think?
options.
Well, I think we need to do some kind of hybrid combination.
That was my initial
like-
thought. What were you thinking?
I don't like 30 years of debt, though.
Yeah.
Aim for the 20.
What were you thinking? Was there a, like, one of the plans
I
that,
mean, I have no equations that drive me to it, but I'm more comfortable at the 50% split between those who used and those who will use. And the rate increases were not too distasteful, put it that way. At that level, it smoothed it out. When we do.
I know that I hated that first one.
The 80.
Oh, yeah, I hate the first
Yeah,
one, and
yeah.
the third one, you're like,
Yeah.
nah.
Feels like, yeah.
But again, you're committing those future dollars. But it's a normal practice we do.
Is that enough
Uh,
direction?
Council, or would you like me to just bring it back to committee and kind of further the COSA, or I'm sorry, the cost of service, or anything unpacked further?
I think council, I think this is something everybody's gonna want to weigh in on.
for the same kind of conversations, bring Sergey to give the same presentation, or?
Do you think that's necessary
Maybe a
I feel like you could
concentrate on the
probably,
things that we were looking at, but give a, like a light overview of the other options that were much more distasteful.
yeah,
Yeah.
Mike.
I would request Sergey Light.
That's what I
That
was.
was it.
Sergey Light.
What is Sergey
Can,
Light?
can Dylan do Sergey
Sergey,
Light?
delete every other slide and bring back 8 slides.
Well, I'm going even lighter beer than that. Can staff do the presentation?
I,
Or Sergey Light or Sergey Full Body? Excuse me,
In
Sergey,
light
we're
of-
really messing with you. He get, it's consultant fees.
it
that evening.
is in light, and they are in the contract, but in light of potential questions that could come in, I think it'd be more efficient at this early stage in the process that Sergey is available to answer those at that time rather than having to come back 2 weeks later with the answer. Especially since we're going to the full council.
We can modify the presentation though to shorten it up, to go more succinctly at the a specific element of it too, in Sergey Light fashion.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. Sergey Light, will you put that on the, to the council? We can get that.
Not full bodied.
Not full-bodied.
I didn't say full figured. I said-
Thank you, Mr. Tarasov.
Thank you.
I think we probably have to entertain a
Motion to adjourn.
So move.
thirded. We're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sergey.